Hey 3DMJers, this is Andrea Valdez, and I have a huge Black Friday sales announcement to tell you about before we get into today's episode. For those who aren't aware, Coach Eric Helms, along with myself and our good friend Andy Morgan, created a series of ebooks called The Muscle and Strength Pyramids. These two books, one on nutrition and one on training, have become the industry standard for applying a science-based approach to gaining strength and manipulating body composition. If you're a bodybuilder or powerlifter, coach or athlete, or anyone who's trying to get jacked and shredded, you'll learn everything you need to know about 3DMJ's standards and approach to developing our own clients and their careers. So tomorrow, November 24th, Black Friday 2017, we will be having a 25% off sale for 24 hours only. The set of books, which usually cost $67, will be on sale for $49. Not only do you get those delivered to your email immediately, but you also get lifetime updates when you buy the set. So every edition from here on out will be emailed to you as well upon its release for many years to come. So set an alarm or a reminder on your phone to go to muscleandstrengthpyramids.com tomorrow, November 24th, Black Friday, to get 25% off and lifetime updates on both the Muscle and Strength Nutrition Pyramid and the Muscle and Strength Training Pyramid. Both books, $49, lifetime updates. Thanks so much for listening. In today's episode, I'm joined by Eric Helms and Brad Loomis as we discuss when the recovery diet ends. In other words, once your bodybuilding competition season is finished, how do we differentiate between the recovery phase where we're purposefully putting on body fat and the actual off-season where we're slowly putting on muscle? It's not so much about what those stages are, but more about how we can tell as coaches when someone is actually well-fed and psychologically recovered versus when they're still in need of more body weight or more time. The first few minutes of this episode will have a further introduction to that topic, so I won't say too much more about it now because you'll hear it. But if you wanted to go back and check out our episode that actually does identify the specifics of the recovery diet a little more, you can go back to podcast episode number 20, which is from about a year ago in October 2016. So, as usual, if you have any feedbacks or comments on this episode, though, episode number 72 that you're listening to, go to 3dmusclejourney.com or leave it for us at our YouTube channel at youtube.com/team3dmj. Here is When the Recovery Diet Ends with Brad Loomis and Eric Helms. So, Eric, when I say recovered, can you give the listeners, because you're good at this stuff, a roundabout summary of what I mean by recovered and the recovery diet and all that jazz?
Word. So I think people are still quite familiar with the term reverse diet, which is basically you diet down to being shredded. If anyone was listening, I'm having an angle with my hand, and then you diet up out of the diet. Anyone who's just listening, I'm angling up with my hand, clearly assisting your understanding of my words, so that you have a steady decrease in calories to get shredded, and therefore to prevent the excess gain of fat. And to stay as lean as possible, you slowly track food up. Problem with that, though, is that you're primed for fat storage post-show, and behaviorally, you're going to be fatigued, beat up, tired, and just super, super hungry. And you're not really going to get some of the proposed benefits of reverse diet of enhancing metabolic rate, getting an enhanced quote-unquote P ratio and getting more muscle until you actually get your hormonal status sorted, put on some body fat, and actually get yourself in a position where you can make gains. So the recovery diet is probably the more physiologically based in reality approach to where you go, right, you have just dieted yourself super, super hard. You're beat up mentally and physically. You need to put on some body fat, and we need to get you recovered and hormonally sorted. So the first thing we're going to do is get you into an aggressive surplus, but less aggressive than if you were left to your own devices and just binged your face off. Get you gaining upwards of, say, 5 to 10% of your weight back within 1 to 2 months, and then tapering off there and kind of just slowly going into more of a gaintaining status like we normally have our athletes do in the off season.
Right. And that recovery, which would be the goal, right? We named it that because that is the goal, but to some people it sounds like, so we got to get fat real fast. And that's definitely not what we're saying. Go ahead, Brad, you're shaking your head. What is it more of then?
No, I'm just in agreement. I'm in agreement. It's more so, in my opinion, in a nutshell, you are weak, fragile, and you're going to blow away with a stiff wind. And we need to fix that. We need to make you strong again, and not going to blow away in a stiff wind. And yeah, that was when we coined the term recovery. That was kind of one of my fears, was that people were going to interpret it just as that. Oh, well, I need to get fat is what they're saying. And that's not what we're saying. So yeah, I was basically shaking my head in agreement with you, saying, no, that's not what we're saying. We're trying to make you unfragile.
Right. And so for the listeners, we do have an entire podcast, a long discussion about the recovery diet. We have a 30-minute video on YouTube all about that. And we also at 3dmjvault.com have an entire course where that long video is chopped up into pieces with supportive texts and videos and articles and all that stuff. So the summary,
free course.
Yes, completely free course, the whole thing.
Which we will link for you.
Yes, will be linked in the show notes. And also, if you just Google recovery diet, you can find a whole bunch of stuff as far as the general, very general guidelines that we recommend. So there's that. We won't go super far into what it is, but this podcast is more like, I think we've done a good job spreading the word, but people think that if they've put on that 5%, then they must be ready for a fully productive off season. And that's where it gets a little tricky, a little more gray, a little less, I don't know. It's just not that simple. I know none of the shit we do is that simple. We always talk about it. But as a coach, right, this is only my second full season coaching contest prep athletes with 3D. And I find that this is the hardest part of my job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And it's such a gray area. It's like, even when you are probably physiologically recovered, you're probably not mentally recovered. I know I can kind of raise my hand when, I say that. And some people that are possibly mentally recovered are probably not totally physically recovered, But yeah, I think that's why it's so hard to define when you are quote unquote recovered, because we're all different. We diet to different degrees of severity. We're more fragile than others. We're less fragile than others, I think we could go on for a while about everybody that lives in that gray area.
Yeah. And what's hard, or what was personally hard for me, and what's hard for my athletes that are they might be really experienced, but I'll just keep using myself because I can easily talk shit about myself. Because I don't talk shit about anybody else. But I really prided myself on my dieting abilities and my grit and my stick-to-itiveness and this is no big, I can do it, And then when I was in this recovery phase and I would allow myself every so often to go to dinner, I literally couldn't stop eating, and I would get this shame cycle of how the fuck could you diet for 6 months and now you can't, you can't stop at a normal amount of sweets. Yeah, who is this? Who are you? An athlete wouldn't do this. And now out of it, I know there are physiological reasons why that happens. But to me, I was just mentally you're not that hungry. You've eaten enough today. You already hit your macros. Why are you keep eating? And I would get so upset with myself mentally, because I know I'm mentally strong enough, but it was hard for me to fathom. I couldn't understand. Not that I couldn't understand. It was hard for me to be but physiologically you're weak right now, and you're in a compromised state, and you think hunger is just a willpower thing, but it's your body being hungry is different. I know you could probably speak to that more, Eric, after Brad. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, look at what Jeff said and his analogy, as caveman, if we starved for 15, 20, 30 days and we went out and killed a woolly mammoth, we'd probably eat that entire woolly mammoth, whether we needed to or not, and there would just physiologically, we've got 30 days of eating and nourishment to make up for. So to combat that, I can almost picture Jeff like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and I try to always be so like, what makes sense? Like, obviously, if you've eaten your assigned macros, you should be full, and that's just like not how it goes.
Yeah.
Eric, can you explain more about that and why physiologically we're compromised, and why that overeating isn't always necessarily like a lack of willpower thing in that suppressed state?
Yeah, I mean, right. So there's cool stuff on willpower and what it actually is, and most people who think they have really high willpower are actually just quite good at setting up systems and boundaries and managing their environment. Tracking macros is an example of that. Having a coach, setting up deadlines and having a day to get on stage and having a plan. All of those things eliminate the need for you to make choices. And every time you're faced with a choice, it's an opportunity for you to fail, if you think about it. So someone who might be amazingly, quote unquote, willpowered during prep, they have all these kind of hard lines in their brain around what the rules are around what they can eat and what they do, whether that's a clean eating approach and certain foods are off the table, whether that's a time restricted feeding window, so certain times are off the table, or whether that's certain macro targets, so going over that is off the table. It doesn't really matter. But the problem is that most people finish the prep, and then some degree, or to some large degree, typically, if they're not prepared for it, they remove those boundaries. So now they feel like they have no more willpower because they thought it was just a quality of their person, but rather it's just they're good at setting up structure and systems within themselves, and they know what works. And they've never been faced with a period where they have a physiological drive for hunger and not a clear goal, in combination with a loss of that structure and having a tough time rationalizing why a structure should be put in place anymore, so that you're not getting on stage. So it's this convergence of physiology, psychology, and situation, and a lack of goal that really tends to cause problems with people. And while I can say that the recovery diet approach versus the reverse diet approach has been a lot more successful, it's still hard, like you guys are both talking about.
Well, I didn't do that.
And I think that right, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was probably
even now,
not
though,
eating
I would
enough,
say, with our athletes.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah. So.
Sorry. No, I was gonna say I think it just speaks to what we know now versus, because that was only like 4 or 5 years ago when the reverse diet was the big deal, right? And I think now all of us as coaches would see, because Bert was coaching me and it was the best we need to do, and it was like, of course this is what we do. But I think now anyone seeing that, how like a normal day, a normal 2 full weeks, if I'm hitting my macros, it's no big deal. It was when I'm going out to a dinner and I know how to do this. It's no big deal. I hit my macros every day. And you finish the first course, and then it's like the ravenous hunger. When like now I'm seeing that, and as a coach, I'd be like, okay, on the normal days, this person's not eating enough. They're not recovered enough. We need to get them recovered sooner. But at the time, it was the emotional, like, how come I can start this one meal every week or two, and it's not even like I'm planning to binge. It's just, and it was never like a binge fest, but it was like, how can I keep my shit 98% of the time? I introduce one different meal, and it triggers this physiological, like, and maybe, I don't know, triggered like it's 7 p.m. dinner with friends, and at 10 o'clock I'm eating ice cream, and at 11 o'clock I'm eating a bowl of cereal, and at 12 o'clock, because this is the one night I had because I'm going to get back on those macros tomorrow kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where me as a coach, I'm seeing the benefits of the more extreme than you would think overfeeding very early on, as soon as the show is over, which does all the things you talked about, Eric. But that would be a sign of someone who, like, I was a fine body weight, I was in my 5 to 10% or whatever, but obviously I wasn't recovered, because that's not normal. Because now I go out to dinner and it's like, when dinner's over, dinner's over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that like 5 to 10% weight gain is more just getting you out of the danger zone.
Right.
If you do that in a structured manner with an aggressive but assigned caloric surplus, you get to 5 to 10% over your last stage weight. If you do that without any structure, you get to 15 to 20% over more often than not. And I think if you can get yourself out of the danger zone and just basically prevent obesity, right?
Yeah.
Then from there, you can take that slow, measured approach, and you have enough kind of a depletion of that hunger and a renormalization of your ability to like think and feel and be a human again, who's not just focused on, de-starving themselves. That's when you can go, okay, now I can, it's not easy and I'm definitely still food focused, but I can stick to only being in a 200 calorie surplus now that in these first 1 to 2 months I put on, 10% of my body weight versus, getting there, but being 10, 15, 20 pounds heavier than you would have been without kind of the recovery approach. And often what happens with the reverse diet is that you just kind of get in this yo-yo cycle.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, it's that binge shame cycle because you're asking yourself to do something you just simply can't do, and over and over and over again, and it just kind of prolongs the whole process, and it either you give into it and say screw it, and then it's hard to go from a failed reverse to anything because you're just beating yourself up so much that then instituting a smarter plan, it's like at that point you're just so done with everything, you're like, whatever, I'll just eat and get fat and I'll deal with it later. So I think it's that's why the recovery diet seems to be much more successful, is you're just asking yourself to do something realistic given the situation. And it actually is better. I think a lot of people will position it as, the recovery diet is realistic, but the reverse diet's optimal and hardcore. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, being in a deficit for another 6 weeks and still hanging around 7% body fat, like, since when is that going to like help you gain muscle if our goal is actually getting into the off season? But I think that's the tough part, is like you said, that there's an unclear gray area between where does the recovery diet end and where does the off season start.
Right. And so I think we can obviously say, if you are still your stage weight, we're not recovered. Okay, that's easy. And then say we do gain that. And again, like you keep saying, some people it could be a little less than 5%, some people more than 10%. But there obviously will be an amount of weight gain. And we got that. But I think what's this podcast, I want to, say get people to understand it's not my duty, but to talk about is like that there are a lot of other signs that we're not healed yet that aren't like the way you look and that aren't the amount of food you're eating. Mm-hmm. And like
how many?
Go ahead, Brad.
No, go ahead. You go. No, you go.
Like that, like my thing or the story that I just said about that lasted like months, that I was at a certain body weight and I kept my shit almost all the time. But those few times I did, not, or it wasn't even like binge like till I got sick. It was just like, why do I need an extra 1,000 calories today? There's no need for that. Mm-hmm. And it was like once or twice a month, and it seems like it could not be a big deal. But now that I'm, 3 years later and I know what it feels like when I'm not underfed, like those were very clear signs that I was underfed. And if I was maybe a not so great dieter, those kind of nights for most people might have happened like 4 times a month. I don't know. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But there's still, that is a sign that, and I think I subconsciously knew it, but that would be a sign that like something isn't healed in you, that shouldn't be, because I'm not an emotional eater. It would just be, like I said, it was like a weird loss of control. And like in the middle of it, I would recognize like, this isn't normal. What the fuck am I doing?
Yeah. And a lot of times, in my opinion, that what you're kind of talking about is kind of the sign that you are not recovered, where you've got this extreme, you've got extreme two ends of the pendulum. On one side, you're either tracking macros and you're hitting your optimal macros for reverse dieting, mm-hmm. or you're going out and you're just binging, and you can't control yourself. I call it the blood in the water effect to a shark. It's like Bruce on Finding Nemo. The eyes roll back and you just lose your freaking mind and you're just ravenous, right? I mean, that's what we feel like.
Yeah.
But I think, in my opinion, and what I've seen and what I've kind of felt is when you can recognize that, you know what, I can go through the day today and have 3 normal square meals, not binge, not eat until I'm full, but yet not track macros. You're kind of on the road. You're on the road. You're well on your way, in my opinion, because how many people can't even do that? I'll just tell them, just go out and have 3 meals. Go have a normal breakfast, normal lunch, normal dinner, period. Don't forget to have dessert. Let's have dessert with dinner, Oh, well, what should my calorie target be? I don't care. Don't worry about it. Have 3 square meals. Oh, well, how much protein should I hit? Again, once you can go out and eat like a normal person, like 90% of the population, even if it's just one day, and then you're back to just eating normal macros, and you didn't binge, and you didn't lose your shit, and you didn't, do Bruce, like, Finding Nemo, you're probably, getting there. You're getting there, at least mentally, in my opinion, because you can kind of recognize what's normal and what is the extreme that we go through to get on stage.
Yeah.
I would agree. I think if you're at a point where you're tracking macros or calories and protein or body weight and protein or whatever system you have gotten to, but you're doing that because you think it will help you effectively reach your goals as a bodybuilder, not because you have to do it or you will binge, that is a point at which you're probably at least got the mental side of the recovery down. And that's typically, I find that it's rare that someone can be psychologically recovered, restore a normal relationship with food, be good to go, but their body isn't still quite there. Yeah. That can happen in super experienced competitors sometimes, especially those who tend to err on the side of under eating, but it's pretty rare for that to happen just for your average person.
Yeah. Shit. When Brad finished, I had it, and then I was like, yeah, Eric, what you said, and then I forgot what I was going to say. So sorry about that. But I think talk it out. They know that's how I process. The difference, or a difference, because all I can do is compare like where I feel like a normal person now eating for performance versus that weird like year after the last time I competed was. And again, just because I have an athlete that's going through this right now, it's like you have dessert. Like right now, if I go out for ice cream or something, I'm like, that was good, and I'm done. Whereas there was a year there where it's like, well, this is a day that it's a special event. They have 5 desserts, and obviously I need to have all 5. You know what I mean? And it would be fun, and I would like, not gonna be like, hey, I'll be bloated tomorrow, and it's no big deal. But it's like now I look back and I'm like, nobody has 5 desserts. Like without, like now I would feel like my stomach would hurt, and I don't do that now. That's not normal, you know? But I would always see it as like, because it's rare and I do it and I just know the bloat will go away in a couple days, it's not a big deal. Like I would rationalize it because I just spent so many years tracking so strictly that really was letting loose. And now it's like, nobody, like people get, like their stomach will get upset. Like if you eat a whole pack of cookies, you don't feel good. And most people don't want to not feel good, but when you're when you're in that weakened state, you don't care about feeling good. You care about satisfying whatever this weird thing is.
Yeah, there's a I think when things start to taste good, but in like the normal good, not like the crack cocaine kind of good.
Yeah.
That's like, I remember in 2009 on the way back from the Washington show that Jeff and I did. Yeah, and Bert coached me through that. We stopped at Outback, and I had like the walnut vanilla brownie.
Oh, I know that one. Cinnamon Oblivion, dude. Or the chocolate thunder from Down
good,
Under.
Right?
One of them is real. They're both good. Yeah.
I had the more vanilla-y one, and like it's good. Don't get me wrong. And I would crush that on my own and be full and be like, that's awesome, you know, on a regular day. But I remember sitting there eating it, and I looked up at Berto and I said, the way this tastes right now, I would gladly give up my entire bodybuilding career just to eat this all the time. Like, it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. Like, I don't care if I'm obese, because this tastes better than anything in life, you know? So
that's healthy.
That's clearly, I wasn't recovered, you know? That was like the day after my competition, after, you know, dieting from January to August. So like, and it was just funny, you know, him and I laughed about it. It wasn't my first season, but it was certainly, I think that's when shit tastes too good. That's another good indicator, you know.
And it will. That's the thing, is it will, and it should for a while. And but at some point that needs to start going away, and people are going to say, well, after how long? And that's what sucks, is like, we don't know.
Well, and it kind of depends on the severity of the diet too, in my opinion, because I remember vividly going through the same feels that Eric had in my first season when I was hardcore. It was chicken and broccoli, protein powder, and meal replacements, for like 6 months. And that very next day after my show, we were at the all-you-can-eat buffet at the Peppermill in Reno, and people were laughing at me because I'm just like, oh my God, this is so good. I'm going to cherish every single bite of this, every single bite of this I'm going to cherish. And then you contrast that, fast forward about 11 years when I did my last pro show in Sacramento, and we were all at BJ's, and they had the Physique at BJ's, which is a pretty fine dessert, And I think if that was the 2003 version of me, I would have been, like, no, mine, get away, and just, but, because my diet was not so severe, because I used smarter ways of doing it. I had a longer, kind of a diet. My son and I split it, and I was fine with that, So the degree in which the severity that you diet, how long it is, and how restricted that you are, I think a lot of times carries over into how long your recovery could be until you reach that state of being, recovered.
Yeah, for sure. And how lean you get, right? Like, this is probably going to be a much more difficult thing for like someone like a pro male bodybuilder versus like someone's first bikini or physique show. Like
that's a good point too. Yeah.
Like when you get real extreme, your life has to be a lot more interrupted, regardless of how flexible you try to be. It's just, it can be the duration.
Yeah,
the
experience is a
intensity
huge moderator.
Yeah, that too. Because it feels like the more years you compete, the more you realize, like, even if I jack this up, like, I can fix it. It just feels so, we've talked about this all on the podcast, but those first seasons or two, it feels so final and important.
Yeah, knowing there's a light at the end of the tunnel, both during prep and after, I think is incredibly useful. So if you know that if you have it in perspective, how long it's going to take you to really, really dig into what it's going to feel like and what it's going to produce, and have confidence in that, and knowing that you're not going to lose all your muscle and that you will get shredded, and it'll be worth it, you can push yourself harder to get leaner. And while that also makes the recovery harder because you got leaner and had to dig harder because you had mentally tough enough to do it, you also then know with multiple seasons experience that the recovery also has a light at the end of the tunnel, that you're not going to feel ravenous and food focused forever and lethargic, even though you've increased your food and aren't happy with the way your body's changing. It's only getting worse. And I think that was one of the biggest struggles I had in my first season. Was I just was like, am I ever going to feel satiety again? Or am I just going to be hungry forever? And that's what it felt like. So I did the same kind of thing. I'd be like, well, the only way I'm ever going to be okay is if I count macros and restrict myself. So if I get dessert today, I better eat all of it and then 3 others, because I never know if I'm going to have it again. Am I going to get to eat tomorrow? So that kind of crazy, not so logical thinking is what kind of drives it. But, fast forward to my third season, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be hungry until I'm not, but I don't want to get like sloppy fat. So I'll just be a little hungry and slowly gain weight, and I know it'll go away eventually. And that was much easier to do because I knew it wasn't a permanent state, and I wasn't in a state of fear, I think is what it really comes down to.
Good way to put it, yeah. And it's that career versus that career mindset, right? Like, is this, do you see bodybuilding as a sport, and do you want a career in the sport versus like, oh, this is the one show you're doing in your lifetime, or like this is your, because like when you do your first show, I don't think some people know like this is what I want to do for decades. But a lot of people are like, let's try this out and see if I like it. I think maybe that might be another reason why it feels so final. As opposed to even if you, like you said, it's like, okay, even if I get a little fat, at least I'm in a better position to put muscle on, and that's going to make me look better 2-3 seasons from now, kind of thing. Or later on in the career, because that's the goal of the off season.
Yeah, I think it's especially tough for people who use prep as a vehicle for
transformation.
I'm doing this, I'm turning 50 and I want to be in great shape. Yeah. Or I want to get in great shape for my wedding and do a show prior or whatever, like, or I'm just going to do this one time. I just want to get in great shape, because then I think they think that they will have learned something, accomplished something. They'll be able to maintain that look or some semblance of it, instead of it being about, I'm going to hit this fastball, knock it out of the park, and then next season I'm going to get, better at hitting fastballs and do it again. And I think with an athletic mindset, like you said, or approach to the sport or to bodybuilding and seeing it as a sport, I think things make sense. You can see more of kind of the shortest path from A to B versus getting confused by the fact that, well, I did this to look great and now I'm starting to look worse. Like, I've got to be restricted. And it's like, if you didn't do it to look great, if you did it to compete, then it's a little different. And it's much easier to fix myself. To stomach, I think. That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
I did this to fix myself, to get opposite, to either get it, and it's hard, like we've talked about this a lot. It's hard when you're, because a lot of people that are into bodybuilding that want to compete in it, usually they come from a background of someone who at least likes working out, and sometimes it's like a personal trainer whose job is it's a little easier to get clients when you look jacked and shredded. It's a little easier to get the Instagram followers when you're jacked and shredded. It's a little easier to get the opposite sex attention when you're, so it makes all these things that if you're insecure in those certain areas, or if your emotional well-being is very much attached to those areas, and then it's not just about like, I'm putting on fat to get into an off season to put on muscle so the next time I get on stage it's better. Now it's like way more complicated, and that makes it a lot harder to fully recover, right? Because you're trying to hold on to that body, which kind of backfires. I'm trying to think too. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, to bring it back, it's like, I think you have to have a recovery diet requires a certain level of looking at it from an athlete's perspective. What is the fastest path I can use to get to making progress so I improve next time I get on stage? It's certainly not hanging around stage condition. So, okay, but I also don't want to get so fat that I have to diet longer next time or miss a season and then lose muscle trying to diet it off. Okay, what makes sense? What is the fastest path? Right. So I get to the low end of my settling point kind of range and then slow it down. And I do that rather expediently. So I think, what are the goal outcomes? I want to be making progress in my training, and I want to be putting on new muscle. So if I can't recover from training, if I'm not sleeping well, if I'm not seeing signs of like a normal hormonal state, so guys maybe waking up with a little more attentiveness down low, or actually, or gals and guys just simply being interested in the opposite sex again. That's a funny thing. People would get shredded to attract the opposite sex, and they have no interest in them once they actually get shredded, which is ironic to me. But yeah, so once you start to feel more like a normal human again, you know that you can make some human adaptations to resistance training. So I think that's another way of just knowing, am I recovered? Is, do I feel normal? Am I functioning normally? Can I sleep? Am I attracted to whoever I'm attracted to? Yeah. And can I progress my loads in the gym? Am I getting back to my previous off-season levels of strength, and then ideally past them? And if those things aren't happening, then it's either just a matter of time, or it's a matter of maybe you aren't recovered, or maybe you're being too restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Which, to expand on kind of what you're talking about there, Eric, is sometimes just not being rational is a sign that you're not recovered. And to elaborate on that, I mean, I get athletes quite a bit that are like, okay, I want you to be able to show me how to be able to eat whatever I want, not track my macros, and still look like this.
Yes.
And I don't think that is a normal, rational, person that's saying that. I think that's a person that's basically not recovered yet. They're of this delusional thinking that, the reverse diet is magically going to increase their metabolic rate, exponentially tenfold to Alberto-ish type levels. And they're going to be able to just eat, literally just kind of eat whatever they want, And I mean, I'm not going to, point fingers, because I can raise my hand and say that I'm guilty of that, And again, that's kind of where experience comes in, because
Yeah.
eventually a rational person is going to say, okay, you know what? My metabolic rate is higher now. My blood pressure is higher. My respirations are higher. All that stuff that gets suppressed during a competition diet, yes, it's higher, but it's still not going to change my eye color miraculously brown to purple. You know what I mean? You can only deal with what God gave you. And eventually when a person just comes to the fact that they say, okay, if I want to stay looking like this, I'm going to need to show some form of restraint, whether that's the tiers in our flexible dieting, good, better, best, or alternatively, if I can't adhere to that, I know that I can get back to this lean-ish state again, but right now I've just got to allow a little bit more body fat to go on because I'm not willing to live like that. And once you kind of reach that rational state, I think there again, you're kind of on the road to recovery.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
I think that's very well said. And I think the reverse diet is born out of the desires of bodybuilders and physique competitors who aren't in that rational state yet. Mm-hmm. When you really think about it, everything about it caters to that split kind of holding on to two things that can't coexist, cognitive dissonance that occurs at that point, where you feel like everything rides on the fact that you have to maintain this leanness, and you want to eat more, but you don't want to gain weight. So the metric by which people, if you look at the advertisements for reverse dieting, it's all based around how high did I get my macros without putting on body fat. And when you really think about it, neither one of those has anything to do with bodybuilding.
Yeah.
You don't get to wear a shirt that says your macros on stage. You just get to be big and shredded and win, or you get to be small and depleted and not lean and lose. Mm-hmm. So whether or not some point 4 months post your show you're still in stage shape, yet you're able to double your carbohydrates, is completely irrelevant. It just says, I really like to eat a lot of food, so I've eaten a lot of food, and I really want to stay lean, so I've managed to do that. But that's not success. You
well, how are you going to get bigger? Muscle. Yeah.
Exactly. You're not, so it doesn't even in those rare cases where you do see those success stories of someone who managed to, add 150 grams of carbs and, 25 grams of fat and only 5 pounds of body weight over, a 6 to 8 month period sometimes. I'm thinking, wait a minute, it's 8 months after your show and you're only 5 pounds heavier? And the only thing you have to show for it is 3 extra Pop-Tarts? That was your off season? You didn't add any muscle. You added Pop-Tarts. Congratulations. You're not a bodybuilder. I don't know what you are. You're just someone with an extended eating disorder. So yeah, I think that, and like Brad said, I'm not trying to beat up on anybody. The reverse diet totally
we've all been
appeals
there,
to all of us. Yeah, we all would love that in that mind state. But it only starts looking crazy once you actually get out of that mindset. Which is why I think some of the first people to call BS on the reverse diet weren't bodybuilders. I remember the first people to critique it were Alan Aragon, Lyle McDonald. They were, smart people who were very aware of the kind of the bodybuilding mindset. And they kind of said, look, guys, the emperor has no clothes here. This doesn't make any sense. I know you want it to make sense. I understand, but why would you stay in a deficit after your show? How could that help anything, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Wow. That was fun. You didn't gain muscle. You gained Pop-Tarts. That's good. And I think some weird things too that I was trying to be what the hell else with the athletes is a good sign that we're either not there yet or we are getting there or whatever. Aside from all the crazies we've talked about, that a real common one is people freak out when their body fat, your distribution's different. They'll freak out and they'll be like, yes. Oh my God, I've lost my abs. I always had abs before my show. You're one of those people, Eric, you have abs almost all the fucking time. But it comes on to, I, for a girl, don't have side ass so much normally. But after my last show, I had little saddlebags and I was like, what is this? Is this how I am now? Is this what is going on? But when weight is coming on and it comes on different than what I think is your normal rest of your life storage pattern, that's a pretty good indication that look, we're still in a big transition. This might be a month later, but this is not real life. and it's not your forever. Have you
Yeah,
guys seen
that
that too?
indicates two things. Yeah, one is we know that, well, your hormonal status is relatively what it is when you're in a normal state. It's
Right.
obviously changed by dieting, and that's why there's all those, quacky pseudoscience stuff around, like, manipulating your hormones with diet, and, oh, you have a lot of fat on your back, that means you're insulin resistant or whatever. But all that's crap. However, it is true that there's a relationship between your hormonal status and where you store body fat. And if you're storing it differently, you know that your normal hormonal status is different, right? Or I should say, you are more prone to retaining water, which is an indication that your cortisol levels are jacked up through the roof, right? Or it's just an indication that you're eating really weird and your sodium is super high, either because you're piling on Walden Farms because you're trying to restrict, or you're out there binging your face off and you're eating way too much. So it's typically an indication that one or multiple systems is not quite right yet. Another good indicator is just like when you are able to eat what you want in a reasonable amount and not have like diarrhea or gas or really odd smelling flatulence or things like that, just because like when you diet, even when you follow a rather flexible approach, just the sheer amounts of food that decreases, some of the enzymes and the bacteria that's in your gut that helps you digest the amount you're used to in the off season is going to get depleted. So when then you try to throw a lot at that system, either in terms of total amount or types of foods, depending on the dietary approach you took, it's going to be weird. Things are going to get messed up. And when it stops feeling so weird, it's a good indication that you're actually kind of got your gut fauna and flora back to normal. You have enough enzymes to digest food, and it's probably an indication that you're eating more reasonable portion sizes.
Yeah, good point. And the food choices too, right? Like that's a good point that people, or I've had athletes too. They're like, "Is something wrong with me? Like I'm farting all the time and it smells really bad." And there's that happens to a lot of people in prep. And I think I mean, especially like a female, when you're almost at some point close to stage lean, you're going to have a very large majority of your carbohydrates come from vegetables. You're also probably seasoning the shit out of your foods so that they're palatable. And like you mentioned, Eric, you totally completely changed what you've been eating for. Like there's an adjustment period, right? When you do a dietary overhaul. Like you said, the flora, whatever. The things you said. Your gut health is
for sure.
jacked up.
Like one I remember is like during prep and for a few months after, I get excited about Arctic Zero. I'm like, oh, this tastes good. And then like when I'm sane again, I eat like 3 bites of Arctic Zero and I'm like,
I'll just have real ice cream.
This is stupid. I'm gonna eat some Ben & Jerry's. This is This tastes like ice that is loosely flavored like whey protein. Oh wait, that's because that's what it is, And yeah, like all the, and like Walden Farms chocolate syrup has this like taste profile of, like good. It starts off and you're like, yeah, this is sort of like chocolate syrup, and then in the middle of the prep you're like, man, this is chocolate heaven and has no calories. There's nothing better on the planet. And then it starts again to be like, this kind of tastes like chocolate. It's the same color, like.
Yeah.
And so you can tell by how much you like diet foods is a good indication. Like if you're 2 months post prep and you're still working in a ton of diet foods into your diet, you probably need to keep eating and keep gaining weight for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I carried packets of Walden Farms ranch dressing out to eat for probably a good year after my last show season. So
ranch dressing, it's pretty good. That one's not bad.
Oh, now we're going to justify my crazy because you don't think it tastes like shit.
Well, here's the thing. Though. Like there
was the problem,
good
Eric.
You can make out there.
The habit was the problem.
Like bringing some sweetener with you, or. I was just gonna say like. Go ahead, Brad.
Go, Brad. Do your thing.
Well, I was just gonna say that just goes to show, like Andrea and I, we prolonged our recovery longer than it really needed to happen, because I can share the same story where I was in your house, Eric, in Sacramento, and I was probably a good 3 to 6 months post show, and you had a jar of Walden Farms peanut spread.
Oh, that shit's definitely not peanut butter.
It was peanut spread. But I just remember at the time, because I was trying to reverse diet and I was trying to hit my macros. I was like, you know what? I've had all my carbohydrate, or I needed to conserve my carbohydrate. Eric said I could have this because he was, of course, wanting to get rid of it because it tastes like poop. I was dipping rice cakes in it. I ate almost the whole jar of peanut spread, and to me, that was just like, oh my gosh, that is the stuff right there.
I bet you shit everywhere.
No, but you know what I did have was the worst
aluminum,
headache.
Splenda, and sodium. Yeah.
I had the worst freaking headache of my life after the day after I woke up. And I remember Barb saying, well, you know what? You kind of ate a whole jar of chemicals. So it really doesn't surprise me that you've got a headache. And I mean, that was worse than any of my migraine headaches ever. So, because with me, my gastrointestinal system is pretty bulletproof. I can pretty much throw anything at it. But I do get headaches, pretty easily depending on what I have. And that was like 3-4 months post-show, and I subjected myself to that when I clearly was not recovered.
Yeah. But that pancake syrup's good.
I think just on
I need
the pancake syrup is pretty good.
Okay.
It's not bad.
Yeah, so
not bad.
Yeah, so on balance, like I think it's also important to point out that your average bodybuilder, fully recovered in the off season, does make different decisions than your average person.
Yeah,
because your average person these days is, probably going towards obesity if we're just to look at, or at least being overweight by the time they're middle-aged, if we just look at statistics in America. So am I saying there's anything wrong with bringing packets of ranch to the restaurant and then getting the dressing on the side and putting it on there? No, probably not. So long as if it's because you're aware that it's easy to sneak in oils and dressings into meals and it adds like 400, 500 calories you wouldn't expect and you'd prefer to control for that, I don't think that's unreasonable. That's really no different than looking at a menu and choosing the thing you like the most that still kind of roughly meets your protein and calorie needs. It's just, not everyone can fit in restaurant foods. They're definitely not. They don't have like the 60-kilo women's menu and then the 100-kilo man's menu.
Yeah.
I can go to a restaurant in the off season and pretty much order anything I want and make up for it, but Barb can't. But they're going to bring the same portion size. And humans, like if you look at studies, we eat 95% of what's put on a plate in front of us when we go out to eat. So it's difficult to manage that. So I think having some level of management in the off season to control fat gain, nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But if you're pulling a Brad Loomis and having like 6 grams of sodium in one sitting because you ate a whole jar of Walden Farms peanut butter, then maybe that's too much.
Well, and I do think that's one kind of positive attribute of the clean eating folk is that, in today's day and age, it is quite easy to consume thousands of calories and really only get this much food, But kind of like you were saying, Eric, it's so easy to overconsume and still not be full, And so when you're a recovering bodybuilder coming out of, a competition state, you're trying to find ways to get the flavor, but not have all of the calories in it, And so one, way to kind of combat that is to try to eat really clean and try to eat really voluminous food and, season it up, have it taste good, and still have it be very calorically, compact. But at the same time, when does that not need to happen? And I think that's that gray area where, you should be mindful of it, but you don't have to live your life, revolving around that.
Mm-hmm. There's also,
I think the difference, just to kind of build on what Brad's point is if you're bringing Walden Farm packets to the restaurant out of fear,
right,
that's probably not ideal. If you're doing it strategically, because you're like, right, I'm trying to gain a pound this month, and
not 12.
We've been eating out a lot, so I need to, not 2 or even 3, then that I think that's different when it's a rational decision versus a lizard brain,
fear-based,
I'm afraid decision. I think that, exactly.
Okay. I don't think I was afraid. I think for a little bit I was. It's just, again, I can rationalize. I'm like, of course, if I got it all figured out now. If I just bring my syrup, bring my ranch, I can eat out at IHOP and anywhere that has sirloin and broccoli with a side salad, no dressing. Which is kind of a ninja hack and pretty good for like your first month or two. But the year later, it was like,
Yeah, and I think if you see it like a hack, there's nothing wrong with that. That's clearly like, I'm trying to have my cake and eat it too, not, oh my God, if I have my cake, I'm going to get fat. So maybe I should at least make the frosting, just chemicals, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or this is the only time I'm going to be able to do this. I better eat all of it.
Yeah, no, it's funny
and
too.
Yours and yours and yours.
There was a long time where my palate had to change. I thought ranch tasted like straight fat film. Like I'd gotten so used to the fake shit for like 2-3 years. But I was like, I had real mayonnaise once and like real ranch, and I was like, oh my God, that's disgusting. And now I'm like, whatever, it's delicious. But it was like I couldn't even stomach it because it tasted like I was drinking fat, but normal ranch dressing. Anyways.
Which is probably another sign that you're not really fully recovered,
Because ranch is
good.
I
mean, oh yeah, it's wonderful, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you can't even really stomach, like Eric was saying, the kind of the gastrointestinal issues, if you can't even stomach, even normal food with normal levels of fat, dairy, if you're not dairy, lactose intolerant, etc., you're probably not quite there yet,
Yeah, and think about that. That was like a lot of foods for me for a while. Like real steak tasted like it had a film of fat over it, even like sirloin. Real cheese tasted like goo. Like now I think it's all delicious, and I did for my whole life before that. It was just like a 5-year period where I couldn't deal with normal fat in foods.
Yeah, well, and I remember too that I remember sweetening stuff so much that I could not even tell that sweet potatoes were sweet. Normal people were telling me, "Gosh, why are you putting all that on that yam? They're so sweet anyway." I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
It's better. It's more sweet, And now that I'm, of course, like we said, fully recovered, I have a sweet potato. I don't need to put anything on it.
Yeah,
it's sweet. It's sweet,
Cool.
So yeah, we've got a few areas we've kind of identified. Like obviously, your palate changes because it's easy to fit in sweetener, 0-calorie sweetener, but there's no real 0-calorie fat equivalent in diet.
Exactly.
So bodybuilders get used to eating a super low-fat diet or a lower fat diet, depending on their approach, and sweetening the hell out of everything because they're hungry. So then as your palate returns to normal, that's an indication of you're eating more normally and you've actually had a decent amount of time to have your taste buds and your stomach adapt. Your gastrointestinal response to food is a good indication of whether or not you're recovered. Another one we haven't touched on is sleep. And you see two types of people with prep: the people who just start sleeping all the time and much longer, or the people who go to sleep and pop up after 4 hours and have trouble falling back asleep.
Yeah.
So if you're the former, once your sleep cycles and your desire to nap actually come back to normal, and you're only sleeping for 7 to 9 hours a night and not feeling the need to take a nap, that's probably a good indication of recovery. And for the people who are waking up in the middle of the night, once you actually wake up in the morning, that's probably recovered. Of course, that's barring people who have sleep problems all the time. And then, can I progress in training? Am I food focused? And I think some combination of all those things is where we as coaches look to see you get mostly back to normal before we go, right, now we're going to slow down your weight gain to something that's a lot slower. It makes more sense. Yeah.
Another one that's a pretty good indicator we're still in a depleted state versus fed would be the way you respond to moderate overfeeding. I feel like now if we all eat an extra 100 or 200 calories, like whatever. But when you are in a dieting phase or just leaving one, if you have a day that's like, again, not a binge day, just like I had an extra 300 calories and you see blips like as if it was a refeed, so that I feel like that's not really normal. Like you're hypersensitive to the like very small calorie changes and sodium changes. Your body weight fluctuates with them quite a bit, whereas in the off season, like deep off season, you don't see that quite so much.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I would totally agree. Yeah. And it's interesting. I think there's a lot of reasons why that happens. Sometimes Obviously you'll gain more weight if you eat more. So if you have a day that's like, I'm just going to eat when you're not hungry, it's maybe a couple hundred extra calories. When you're super hungry, it can be a couple thousand extra calories. In addition to that, if your baseline diet is low in sodium and you are in a stressed out state, then you'll be having a lot of cortisol and jacking up sodium while you're eating a lot and having a low baseline level of sodium, then you're going to gain a ton of weight. So I think there's behavioral and physiological reasons why you might see weight stick around a lot more when you overeat on a single day when you're not yet recovered. So that's a great point. When you find it super easy to gain weight, more than it is normally for you, that's probably an indication that your body wants to gain weight and probably should to some degree still.
That's a good, that makes me think of too, is that you forget that in order to be recovered, like say your normal off season, maybe you even are experienced, it'd be easier to like give this example. If I've done 5 different seasons, right, and in my off season, typically I know I can chill really well at, let's say, like, I don't know, 185, right, and that's cool. But maybe after your show, it might be smarter for some people, and it might be necessary. Maybe I have to get up to like 190, 195 to just get normal real fast, and then my body comes down to 185. I mean, that's kind of extreme, but like I think people have this idea of their off season, or the proven maybe a pretty substantially like regular off season weight, and if they get close to it, they start freaking out when it's like maybe you do go over for a month, but just to get you normal, and then and your body not just will try to get back down, it might put itself back down. But there's that like you said, it's a fear, but almost a freak out of like, oh shit, I'm approaching it way too soon, where it's like, maybe we should get there as fast as possible. And if you surpass it, not like 30 pounds past it, but if you know that that's comfortable, why not get there sooner? And so that it can get comfy again. And if you overshoot it by 5 pounds, it's not the end of the world. I know that's not like fun to say, but because the first time I hit this body weight I'm at now, I looked fat as shit 3 years ago after my last season, and now it suits me just fine, and I'm really comfortable. But that's when I still had all those like weird habits I was talking about. So it's not that the body weight was wrong, and at that time it was too much fat, but now it's pretty standard. I don't know.
And
and a lot of
go ahead, Brad.
Well, maybe you're hitting the same thing I am, but I think a lot of times that's just your body trying to say, look, we need to work more efficiently here.
Yeah.
And I think you're saying that, Andrea, because you've probably seen it, on not only you, but maybe a few of your clients. But I mean, let's face it, when your body wants to get more efficient and it wants to get blood pressure and heart rate and digestion and brain activity back up again, it's basically telling you, look, eat more so that we can get there. And once we're there, now we're going to be more efficient at digesting food. We can handle 100, 200, 300 calorie blips better. And then things will kind of settle back down again. But the more that you fight that is not only just prolonging the recovery process, you're actually fighting your physiology a little bit.
Well said. Yeah, and I think the comfort is just to know, and this is something I've seen in myself, I've seen in all the different coaches, and I've seen in almost every single client I've worked with for multiple seasons, is that how high you have to get post-show gets lower each time. So, for example, I started my first prep at 215 pounds. I dieted down to 178, and then I got all the way to 226 before I had control and quick. The next season, I started prep right about the same, right around, it's about 220. Had to get down to 183. Then I only bounced back up to about 200. And then my final prep, I only bounced back up to like 195. And then I actually was like, I finally got to that point where I was psychologically recovered, but not physically. Like I can handle this, but I don't need to be this lean. I'm not making progress. And I had to actually go, right, let's stop controlling things. So that's a really, really consistent thing I see across people, is that you get better with this over time, and kind of knowing where you've been and where you have to go, and just kind of knowing what's coming around the corner is extremely helpful in making the recovery as only making you only have to go as high in body fat as you have to before you get back to a normal state.
Right. And that's just like a sucky thing. Like you can't fight. It's like if you have to gain. Because I think when I started training for grid, and I couldn't stop eating because I was training so much, but I didn't care. I got up to like 152 or something, which is 5 or 6 pounds more than I am now. And then from that to get back down to here, I didn't even do it on purpose. It was just like I had to get that fed to like deal with what was happening. And now like I said, it happened kind of on its own that I leveled out. And it took me a lot of years to get to a place where like I don't care. Or maybe I just had to find something that excited me so much that I didn't care. But and it only lasted like 3 or 4 months. Or it was like a 3 or 4 month process from like, oh shit, I'm weighing like a pound more a week for like 4 weeks. But this is so different and twice a day and such a big deal. And then again, without me even trying, I just leveled back out over the next month. So it was like a month-long investment of like dealing. And that's the closest thing I can relate to recovering for something or like settling into something, because I've never done it out of the bodybuilding season. But you hear it all the time, and it's hard to believe till it actually happens to you at some point. But like your body kind of chills when it's actually operating in a way it should. It's just we fuck with it so much as bodybuilders that it doesn't know how to calm down.
We mess it up, and we kind of get away from why we started doing this in the first place. I mean, we get in the gym because we want to be strong and we want to look good, and then you're right, we start mucking around with it. Sometimes I think that the final, kind of the final sign of recovery is when you're kind of you let go of eating for aesthetics, and you more so start thinking of eating for performance in the gym and being strong and setting PRs and moving weight and moving good, Sometimes I think that's like almost the final step to recovery. It's like, okay, you know what? This is why I got into this in the first place, And then probably at that point, hopefully, but then at least at that point, you can probably start walking both ends of the scale with a lot more perspective, and you can kind of start being able to turn that switch off and on and not, and recognize it and not have to learn by experience like we've all, talking about like we've done.
Yeah, and what's weird is bodybuilders think that they're different, like eating for performance versus eating for aesthetics, when it's like, look at all the Olympians. Most of them are not obese and they eat for performance. Most of them look pretty damn good. Pretty damn good, but it's because it's like with bodybuilding, you think if you're not eating for aesthetics that you're just going to get fat, and it's not. And unless the fatness is probably more your weird relationship with food and you think you're pushing some type of metabolic something that you're really not. But it's not. If you're actually, if you actually know how to listen to your body and like what feels good, it's not overeating. It's really not. Again, unless you're overeating to compensate for the fact that during the week you diet and so on the weekends you overeat, or because you've done 2 years of this and you somewhere in your brain think that this is shoving you into some anabolic state that's like really not, kind of thing.
Yeah, and I mean just regular. Athletes in general. If you got a big game on Saturday, or Sunday, what do you typically do? You carb up like on Friday.
Well,
if
you're a marathoner.
But that's kind of what you do. You prepare
for
soccer
game
player.
Day.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if
for game day.
Not all sports do that, but yeah, you're right. Some sports warrant it.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we're all getting at though is that like the recovery diet process requires some level of acceptance. We talk about getting to 5 to 10% over, but really it's don't stop trying to do things and just eat at a reasonable pace, have some structure to it. And once you feel okay, that's when you're okay. Not, oh shit, I've gained 10%, but I'm still hungry. I'm doing it wrong. It's like, no, you just have to stop being a control freak and just keep going until you're fine. And where is that? I don't know. It's where you feel fine. Yeah. And I think that's a tough message for most bodybuilders who thrive on control, or don't thrive on it necessarily, but desire it.
Right.
And yeah, that's kind of that's where it's nice to have a coach to at least kind of shoulder some of that burden with you. But when you're on your own, it's like, I think it's very difficult to just realize that I just have to accept that I'm going to eat as much as I'm going to eat until I'm done eating, and then I will slow down. And if I'm fatter than I want because of that, that's okay, because I won't always be that way forever. And most people just can't handle that. So they gravitate towards things like the reverse diet or just prolonging it or being a little crazy.
Yeah.
And
And usually when you learn about, you get so excited because you learn how to flexible diet, you learn how to count macros, that you forget what, like when you said, when you feel okay, but most people, and I know I didn't for a long time, know what feeling was like. Because I just shut it off for so long that I was like, I don't need to feel anything. I just hit these numbers. Like I eat I eat according to this plan.
And the way I work with, when athletes are like that, I go, well, what would you do if I took the numbers away? And they go, I get fat. And I go, okay. and hence the problem. That's how we know we're not quite there yet. Macros should be a tool that helps you improve your nutritional effectiveness, not something that you are required to not get too fat. It should be something that it's not a safeguard against a detrimental effect of your diet. It should be something that's there to improve your diet. And I think once you can get to that state, then you're doing something right.
Man, that was another good speech. It's like you do this for a living.
I'm just bringing the heat today, Peppy.
That was a really good summary, I feel like. I think that's a good closing-ish point. Brad, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would agree.
Okay. So you'll feel okay, and it's going to be okay.
We're all going to make it.
We're all going to make it. All right.
Hey everybody, it's Eric Helms. Thanks for tuning into our podcast. As you know, at 3DMJ we promote evidence-based approaches to the lifting community. If that's something you want to dive deeper into, I'd encourage you to check out my research review, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport, or for short, MASS. This is a review that myself, Dr. Mike Zerdos, and Greg Knuckles put out every month. We cover the latest research publications that are applicable to strength and physique athletes, or anyone who's looking to get stronger or improve their body comp. Our content is in both written and video format. For more information on how to subscribe, check out 3dmusclejourney.com/mass. That's 3dmusclejourney.com/MASS for further details. Thanks for tuning in.